We are actually a walking, talking rainforest. What the hell is this stuff? Let's kill them, and that should fix the problem.
So who are you and what the hell are you doing here?
I'm just a random guy that walked off the street, a super nerd.
Listen, I'm excited, man, because I think this is gonna be pretty interesting.
Yes, yeah. So I'm a microbiologist. I'm Kiran Krishnan. I got into the nutritional industry because of this amazing opportunity to understand how the body works and functions from the perspective of bacteria. Given that bacteria really kind of run the show, they make up most of our genetics. They make up most of our cells. They do most of the metabolic function within our body. So understanding that ecosystem becomes really important, and understanding us and what's really happening in us, right? And then it helps you shape like the systems biology approach to connecting the dots between dysfunction and what's driving the dysfunction, and what in our environment, what in our food, what in our choices are creating the dysfunction that drives the symptoms and the outcomes.
So, microbiologist, did you start here, or
No,
did you find your?
I found my way here. So as a microbiologist, you normally go one of three routes. So my biggest interest was what they call clinical microbiology, which is studying the role of bacteria in disease, but it's normally like infections, right? So you study all these pathogens, these fancy pathogens, and the types of diseases they can cause. So then you work in hospitals and labs, and you either develop therapeutics for it, or you diagnose disease based on testing. The other way to go is environmental microbiology. So these are industrial people that do fermentation, that do, water cleaning systems and so on. Or you go into academics and you do research and be a professor. None of those things were that interesting to me. The clinical side was more interesting. I also realized that I didn't want to practice the art of microbiology as much as I wanted to teach about it and use the art of microbiology to understand things that are even more relevant to us, like our health, right? And right around that time, as I was trying to figure out how do I use what I learned to effectuate health impact in people, something kicked off called the Human Microbiome Project by the NIH. The Human Microbiome Project looked to set out to understand what is this really crazy complex ecosystem within us, who all is there, how many microbes are there, what do they do, what functions do they conduct, and so on. And so that became kind of the uncharted territory that I was very excited to jump into.
Excellent. So, people are spending billions in this industry. And, the other day I saw a YouTube video of somebody sticking a tube up their ass and like, whatever, colon cleanse. And then we've got kombucha and probiotics, prebiotics, all this other stuff. Are people just buying a bunch of snake oil and fancy packaging? Or what's going on here?
Yeah, I think unfortunately a lot of it is. So a lot of it has like some degree of premise in that it makes some sense, but they're not putting the effort or the scientific rigor into testing that it works or that it's the right approach. So probiotics are a perfect example of that, right? So the term probiotic was coined in the 1960s by these two researchers named Lilly and Stilwell. The whole idea was that these are beneficial bacteria for life. That's what probiotic means, right? So for life. And before that, most of the thinking was that bacteria is bad. It's going to kill you, right? So now they came up with this idea that there are actually beneficial bacteria that you can ingest that have a health outcome. This came from fermentation, and fermentation of dairy particularly. And so the idea there was that, okay, if you drink a dairy fermented, so they used to have,
With how about like kefirs or something?
yeah, kefirs and all that, right? So like many traditions had all of these fermented dairy beverages already. In fact, in 1901, Ili Mechnikov, a Russian scientist, was given the Nobel Prize for figuring out how to solve inflammatory bowel conditions with the fermented dairy product. And so it stemmed from there. And they said, okay, it's the microbes in the dairy that's actually effectuating the change, right? And so the thinking is that, well, if it's the microbes, then let's just isolate the microbes and give the microbes. Instead of fermenting and doing that, let's just give the microbes, and the more the merrier, right? It's got to be a battle of good and bad. And as a result of the battle of good and bad, let's load it with the good. So the more, the better, right? That was the early thinking. And unfortunately, in the probiotic world, that 1960s like thinking, which is before we ever discovered the microbiome, before we knew anything about anything that's growing in the gut, that same thinking has stuck around till even today in probiotic formulations, where it just lets inundate the gut with a bunch of what we would call good bacteria and try to crowd out the bad bacteria. That doesn't work, right? Because even if we put in 100 billion or 200 billion, it sounds like a lot. We got 40 trillion organisms in the gut, and the surface area of a professional tennis court. It's like 3 or 4 thousand square feet, right? So that 100 billion that you're putting in is really not doing a whole lot unless it's the right microbes that have mechanisms in place that can influence the other 40 trillion. So probiotics are much more specific than we used to think. They're not just about getting a whole bunch of bacteria and inundating the system with 2 or 3 species, and it's not about the count, you know. And that's where companies ended up going. They kept going, well, my competitor has 50 billion, so I'm going to have 75 billion, so I'm more potent, right? None of that. There's not a lot of science to that, so people have to be careful with those.
So explain to me in a layman way why when I drink milk it fucks me up, but when I drink kefir it doesn't.
Yeah. So it's the digestion process, right? So a fermented product like a kefir is pre-digested. So the part that really messes up your gut, the part that you feel like the bloating and the loose stool and all the discomfort, is that there's components within the milk that your system cannot break down. In particular, with milk, it's likely the lactose, which is a form of sugar, or it could even be the milk proteins. So some people are very sensitive to milk proteins, right? And they trigger an immune response in your gut because your immune system goes, "What the hell is this stuff?" And your immune system doesn't tolerate it. So you're getting inflammation. You're not breaking down the sugars. That's causing diarrhea. So you'll get bloating, distension, pain, diarrhea, right? What's happening when you take bacteria and put it in the milk, which is what kefir essentially is, you're getting the bacteria to pre-digest the sugars and pre-digest the proteins so that what you're getting is the organic acid, which is the component of the digestion. So it's digesting it for you ahead of time, which makes it easier on your system, right? So anytime you don't deal well with the food, whether it's gluten or whether it's dairy or whatever else you may eat that doesn't agree with your system, it means that there are components in there that are either A or B or both triggering the immune system in your gut, so your immune system doesn't tolerate that component, and or B, you cannot break it down so that it's irritating your system and causing an imbalance within your system because you can't digest it.
Thank you. That's awesome. I really appreciate that. Um, so you're saying the microbiome is so important. We've always, I say this all the time, like that term gut instinct.
Yeah.
So somebody's known for thousands of years,
Mhm.
right? So you're saying it's a hidden CEO in my body. Who's actually in charge? Is it me or is it the bacteria?
Yeah. So the in charge question is an interesting question, and it's a very native thing for us as humans because we organize our societies that way, right? Where we've got heads of things that are dictating to others. When you look at ecosystems, it's different. You've got roles that different components play, and every one of those roles are equally important. Some influence the entire ecosystem more than the other. Like in any ecosystem, you would have like an apex predator, right? So that is like in the jungles of Bengal, that'd be the tigers, they're the apex predator. But that doesn't mean that its prey is not as important as a predator, right? Something happens to the prey, the apex predator goes, then you'd have disarray, or the shrub that the prey eats. So all of it works together. So truly in the body, what we have is a very complex biological interconnected system with every region of the body connected, and all of it has to work together to function in the whole. So actually there's a new definition for a human. We're called a holobiome, which is a superorganism. We are actually a walking, talking rainforest. So the more we remember to think of ourselves as an ecosystem, the better our health outcomes will be because we become sensitive to the things we do that disrupt the ecosystem, right? So everything is in charge.
So then, if the gut is the second brain, is my first brain just like a useless intern?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, your gut, I actually call the gut the other brain rather than second, right? So the gut and the brain are actually born out of the same part of the embryo, when the embryo is differentiating in mom to become a full-on human, right?
Fucking kidding me.
No, they're the same part, right? And they're intimately connected. So the enteric nervous system, which is this neurological system that covers the entire gut from mouth to the bottom, right? That is the second highest density of neurological endings of the body next to the brain. And they're intimately connected through the vagus nerve and other components. So think of the gut and the brain actually as two parts of the same system. Now, why is that, right? Why does that make sense? Well, what does the brain do actually? The brain takes inputs from everything around us, right? And then it effectuates change, right? No different than if you touch something that's hot, the nerve signals go to your brain, the brain interprets it as danger, makes you remove your hand involuntarily. The brain takes cues from outside, light, visual, dangers, and everything else, right? Sounds, it interprets everything for you. And so the brain is taking inputs about the environment and your ecosystem and all that and effectuating change. On top of that, your gut is doing exactly the same thing. The gut has the biggest sampling site in your body where it samples the environment around you, right? So everything you eat and drink, which is the biggest exposure of your body to the outside world, goes through your gut. In fact, everything that goes through your eyes. So if I'm walking around and stuff in the environment goes in my eyes or I breathe it in, all of that ends up actually in my gut. So, and anything that goes in my ears, my eustachian tubes drip down into the back of my throat. I end up swallowing it. Anything I breathe in that gets caught in my mucus, in my lungs, right? There's hair-like structures called mucociliary elevator that moves all that stuff, and then I end up swallowing it. If you paid attention throughout the day, you'll find, and it's funny because my daughter was just telling me this as I'm driving her to school the other day. She goes, I tried to not swallow for like 10 minutes and it was really hard, right? And I go, that's weird that you notice that, right? We're constantly swallowing, right? We're swallowing gallons of saliva, mucus that's coming out from our lungs and all that. So all of that stuff is samples from the environment that are going into our gut. Our gut is assessing what all that stuff is and then telling the immune system how to react to it, telling our endocrine system how to react to it, our metabolic system, and so on. So both the gut and the brain are the two masters of taking in information about our world and what we do and what we choose to put in and on us, and then interpreting actions as a result of that.
It's heavy. It's heavy for sure. I mean, there are a lot of things you just said to me that, like, I mean, that never even crossed my mind. Like that really kind of give you a black and white perspective on the gut.
Yeah.
Longevity. I recently interviewed Dr. Gundry, and he has a new book out on the microbiome, and his take on it is that as long as your gut is intact, you're living and you're in good shape, and usually that's the first place
Yeah.
that you start falling apart in a sense.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason why, what is it? Not Plato, not Aristotle, but Hippocrates. Hippocrates said that death sits in the bowels and disease is like begins in the gut. Um, and with aging, there's actually a really simple perspective on this, right? So there's this what we call an anabolic catabolic battle that's going on in the body all the time. For people that aren't familiar, anabolic means rebuilding, repair. Catabolic is breaking down, right? There are all of these cells within your system that can either become anabolic or catabolic. A great example of that is in your joints. You've got these cells called chondrocytes. These are the cells that actually lay down the collagen, right? So that you've got your knees can function properly. They're well lubricated. They have cushions on them, and so on, so that you don't develop what we call osteoarthritis. And osteoarthritis is the number 2 cause of disability worldwide, right? So you've got these chondrocytes, these cells that can either build the collagen, or if there's too much inflammation, especially 3 specific inflammatory markers, it's called IL-1, IL-6, and TNF-alpha. What they are is not important. It'll connect back to the gut. But at the end of the day, when you have too much of these inflammatory markers, that collagen building cell becomes a collagen degrading cell. So not only is it not repairing your knees and the lubricants on the knees, and of course your cartilage, it's not building the cartilage; it's eating away at the cartilage. So your joint gets eaten away. In your bones, you have cells called osteoblastic cells or osteocytes, right? They're the same thing. When that inflammation is too high, they switch from bone building to bone degradation. In your brain, you have cells like that. In your muscles, you have myocytes that also do the same thing. When inflammation is too high, they switch from building to degrading. So just keep in mind as people visualize, there are all of these actors within your body, within all of the structural elements that are critically important that go out when we age, right? So what do we feel when we age? Pains, aches and pains and muscle loss and cardiovascular disruption and central nervous system dysfunction, dementia, memory, all of those issues, right? All of those are because of this losing this catabolic anabolic balance, where increased inflammation drives more catabolic function, and those cells switch from repairing stuff to degrading stuff. Now, why does that tie back to the gut? Because the gut becomes the number one source of systemic inflammation, especially those three inflammatory markers I mentioned, TNF alpha, IL-6, and IL-1 beta, right? When your gut is leaky and your gut is dysfunctional and your immune system in the gut is dysfunctional, so you're not communicating with the microbes appropriately, then you end up having chronic low-grade inflammation, which is an elevation of those cytokines, which means the joint cells that are supposed to build the joint are eating the joint. The muscle cells that are supposed to build a muscle are eating the muscle. The bone cells that are supposed to be building the bone is eating the bone. Same thing with the brain cells, heart, and so on. So that is one of the best views of aging because it gives you a target, right? It's like, let's bring down those inflammatory markers and we can switch back to building versus degradation.
So you're saying the gut controls the speed of how you age.
Yes, the gut controls the app, and not only the speed, but also the absolute presence of degradation versus rebuilding, right? Because you could see it in people with degenerative gut conditions. So, like if you take somebody, for example, who has gluten intolerance to the point where they have celiac disease, they've got really advancing dysfunction in the gut, right? So they have very profound leaky gut. Their gut's not absorbing nutrients, and microbiome's all messed up. So you see an acceleration of things like hair loss, tooth decay, bone degradation, muscle loss, and so on. Everything that you see in aging, you see advance in them. HIV patients, right? There's been a number of studies on this where actually the NIH published a study showing that the number one driver of mortality in HIV patients was the severity of their leaky gut. And so the virus causes an attack in the lining of the gut, and you lose these cells called CD4 T cells, and you get these inflammatory T cells called CD8 T cells. So they get really profound leaky gut, and that drives all kinds of destruction throughout the body, right? So the gut plays a very important role in driving that battle between anabolic and catabolic.
Is there a world where we reverse aging through the gut?
So I think there's a world where we can absolutely slow it down to a crawl, for sure.
We're gonna figure that out fast because I'm
Right.
getting old. So
I have too, right? I could feel it. I could feel the differences. But we've done some of those kind of studies both in the gut and in areas like the joint, in areas like the liver, kidneys. There's studies on those organ systems slowing down the degradation, getting the degradation that they experience by fixing the gut and reducing overall inflammation.
there's so much going on in this world with your gut that I think, like I think the last 20 years, like you said, have been really where we figured out a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And this is probably when you first started in your career. You're probably
Yep.
just jumping into this like information, and you know these probiotics have been around forever.
Yeah.
And I'd never really seen a big change in taking them, honestly. I mean, I may talk to people that say, "Oh, I get like, yeast infections. I take a probiotic. I don't get it anymore. I used to get a UTI. I take, and I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not. Like, can you shed light on some of this stuff?"
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that speaks to this idea that most of the probiotics in the market aren't really formulated with a lot of sensibility. It's just throwing in a lot of bacteria.
Can I jump in and say, so you're
Yeah.
saying they're bullshit?
They're bullshit.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Because there's a few different reasons for that, right? So number one, um, there's a lot of what I call kitchen sink probiotics, right? Which is like you just throw everything in there, including the kitchen sink. And the formulation concept behind those is that let's just get more strains and make it look very potent. But we know with bacteria, they are so much more specific. and they're so much more tied to specific functions that you're not going to achieve anything beneficial by just throwing in a whole bunch and saying, we have 15 strains and 30 billion CFUs, right? It matters what you put in there, and it matters how they work together. We had some studies that I was shown at University College Cork, which is one of the largest probiotic research centers in the world. What they showed is like they have a psychobiotic strain, which actually is in a Just Thrive, Just Calm product. It's a strain that really helps with anxiety and mood disorders and mood issues, right? But when you mix it with any other probiotic strain, it basically knocks out its effect, right? It's that simple. And so if you think about how interesting that is, if you take 15 strains together and mix them, you have no idea what the actual outcome is. Likelihood is most of them are just going to die in the stomach and you're not really going to feel anything, right? So with probiotics, you have to get very specific. The strain type matters, the subspecies matters, the dose matters to a certain degree, but you want to know that there's studies on the finished version. So I'd say there's a very small percentage of probiotics on the market that actually will do anything.
And, talk to me, let's take this a little bit further. Just taking the probiotic isn't enough.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So probiotics, like any other supplementation by themselves is not enough, right? Because so what you're trying to do is effectuate change in a really complex ecosystem. And so the probiotic is a component of that. But if at the same time your diet sucks, you're overly stressed, you're not getting exposed to anything beneficial in the outdoors, your home is over sterilized, right? You've got all these personal care products that you use that have toxins in them and all that. That's going to overrun any of the benefits of the probiotic. So I always talk about like a few pillars that you have to stick with in order to really help the probiotic function, and then you'll get amazing benefits out of it, right? So, and most of those are lifestyle things.
Can you give
Yeah.
us what are the pillars?
Yeah. So first one is diet. So one of the things that'll affect your gut the most is what you eat. The more diverse your diet can be, the better. The more polyphenols you eat, for example, colored fruits and vegetables, the better, because polyphenols are really powerful antioxidants. They're also really powerful prebiotics. They also increase the growth of really beneficial bacteria in the gut. Fiber in general is really, really important for the gut. Higher diversity, so lean proteins, lean meats, all of those things, all of them work together. And of course, eating real food, right? Not processed, ultra processed junk. That's one pillar. The second pillar is your exposure, right? So are you exposed to dysfunctional microbes or beneficial microbes? There are lots of studies that show that people who live in urban environments versus rural environments, people in the urban environments have much more dysfunctional microbiomes because they're in buildings and cars and relatively sterile environments most of the time. And the concentration of microbes in those types of environments tend to be dysfunctional microbes because we're sterilizing and cleaning. We select for the most potent dysfunctional bacteria, right? When you're outside, outdoors, and you're in the dirt and you're going for hikes and you're on the beach and areas like that, those are beneficial exposures that have a significant benefit to your gut overall. The third pillar is a couple of key lifestyle components. One of them is rest, and the other one is exercise. So your gut works off of a what we call a diurnal system. It's a 24-hour clock, right? So if you're getting adequate sleep at night, especially between 1 and 3 a.m., that's a very important kind of cleanup time in the system. In your gut, certain bacteria turn on around that time, and they go undo all these housekeeping functions, right? They clean up the lining of the gut. They help you get rid of dysfunctional cells and mitochondria. They help move the system so any stagnant food and all that is moved out through. We all know this feeling like we wake up in the morning, it's that like morning skinny that you feel, right? It feels good, right? You stand in front of the mirror and go, wow, why can't I look like this after I eat breakfast? And that's because your system's kind of cleaned out and everything's pushed through. So getting adequate sleep and then lifting. So lifting weights actually has a direct impact on your gut. So when you lift weights and your muscles resisting against tension, they release something called myokines. These are chemical messengers from the muscles that make their way to the gut that help seal a leaky gut and actually help diversify the gut microbiome. In part, I think that if you think about the evolutionary significance of that, it's that the humans that worked and lifted and built and did all that, they were the ones that ended up being healthier. and more productive members of society, right? And so I think that there is a natural inclination towards doing that. And then the last part is supplementation. You supplements will enhance all of those effects, but you have to do the other things as well.
Thanks for making that clear because I think as Americans, we're always looking for the one pill that does everything.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important that people understand that it takes effort
Yeah.
along with supplementation because, listen, we live in a world now where I'm traveling. I may have to have a French fry today.
Yep.
Right. And, you can't avoid these things. Or, we were talking before in another interview. I eat organic, but, there's probably glyphosate on it from the field next door. Right.
Yeah.
So, even though you're doing what you think is perfect, I think, we have to. And why not? We have the availability of these things, so why not utilize them? Um, so what's the biggest microbiome myth that even the doctors are still looking right now?
Yeah. One of the biggest myths I think is that people think that bad bacteria in the gut are the primary drivers of dysfunction within the gut, right? So it's a complex ecosystem. So the idea is that, oh, you must have pathogenic or bad bacteria that are doing bad things and causing problems, right? Equal to that, if not even more of an influence than the presence of the bad bacteria, is the absence or the lack thereof of good bacteria, right? So one of the things I explain to people is that if you look at your gut, there's a finite amount of real estate in there. In any area that has a lot of dense microbes, every square millimeter of that real estate is going to be taken up by somebody, right? And so if you have an overgrowth of dysfunctional bacteria, it also means that you have an underrepresentation of functional bacteria, right? So the symptoms that people feel aren't just because there's too much of the bad guys producing bad things. It's also because all the work that the good guys are supposed to be doing is not happening, right? So it's an ecological balance. So then it goes to this idea that well, if there's too much bad guys, let's kill them and that should fix the problem. It doesn't, because that killing them does not do anything to help the good guys, right? Because any sort of killing mechanism, whether it's antimicrobials, antibiotics, or whatever, will kill everything in proportion, right? So then it's a battle of who comes back first, and you just can't predict what's going to happen there. So I always encourage, and in fact, I'm teaching a course right now for clinicians to really think about the microbiome as a terrain and an ecosystem, and what you need to do to really enhance functions within the ecosystem, rather than like pinpointing, oh, there's one bad bacteria, I'm going to try to kill it. You're going to cause more problems more often than not.
Why is glyphosate so dangerous?
Glyphosate is one of those really unique chemicals that can selectively kill good bacteria, right, over time. So glyphosate exposure is tiny amounts that we get exposed to on a regular basis, right? And so over time, what tends to happen is it selectively moves the microbiome towards having a higher prevalence of dysfunctional microbes. Why is that, right? So glyphosate does this unique thing where it interferes with the formation of something called aromatic amino acids. Now, the reason why the companies, when they developed this, they thought it was perfectly safe for humans is because our cells don't have that mechanism for creating aromatic amino acids. We use a completely different mechanism, right? It's the herbs and it's the weeds and the bugs and all that use that mechanism. So the rationale behind it was that, well, look, we when expose human cells to it, nothing happens. We're immune to it, right? We don't use that mechanism that it interferes with. But what they didn't know, because we didn't know about the microbiome then, because this was all developed in the 60s and 70s, is that our microbes use that mechanism. So when we're exposed to them, they're killing the microbes. And unfortunately, a number of pathogens within the gut have workarounds for that. So they are, in a way, resistant as well. So that, to me, is the biggest reason why glyphosate can be problematic with ongoing exposure, because it drives the microbiome towards this conformation that really looks bad, right? And we did a study on this, actually, to give you an idea. So we took a pristine 5-year-old's microbiome, right? And this was in a gut modeling system. This is a full GI, mechanical GI tract, if you will, starting all the way from the mouth all the way to the end of the colon. And you can inoculate it with the full human microbiome. So we selected this Norwegian child who'd been vaginal born, hadn't had any vaccines at that time, no antibiotics, had a beautifully diverse, healthy microbiome. We inoculated the system in parallel with 3 or 4 other systems with that child's microbiome. In one of the systems, we fed them the food with EPA accepted levels of glyphosate in the food, and Roundup in particular, the branded version. And then in the other one, we did a control and we just fed the food without the Roundup in it. After 3 weeks of exposure, the one that had the glyphosate in it, the microbiome looked more like that of somebody with inflammatory bowel disease rather than a healthy 5-year-old microbiome, right? In just 3 weeks of exposure. So that demonstrated in this system, and yes, there's a lot of questions whether it translates to human the same way and all that, but nonetheless, that demonstrated that that compound has a profound effect on the bacterial population.
All right, so you scared the shit out of me.
Yes.
What do I do about it?
So I think there's a couple of things you can do. Number one, you could try to reduce your exposure to it, right?
Which we know is impossible.
Which we know is impossible. You will not eliminate your exposure. You may be able to reduce it. So you may be able to reduce it buying, going to farmers markets and buying produce there, assuming that with the farm is that they don't use glyphosate and so on. You may be able to use organic, but organic has their own versions of pesticides that they use on it. But at the end of the day, what you can do, and we're already seeing benefits of this, is increasing the diversity within your gut microbiome because microbes are so good at adapting to stressors, right? In fact, there's 2 studies out that show that there are bacillus microbes that can actually metabolize and break down glyphosate to innocuous substances, unharmful substances, right? And we did a very small benchtop study on this, and we found the same thing a few years ago, that your gut and the microbes within the gut, assuming you have a healthy, diverse gut, will eventually evolve to be able to break down this chemical compound for you. We are already identifying microbes. This is with the company that I worked with earlier, that can break down microplastics in your system, right? And so if we preserve the microbes and we feed them the things that they need and they are robust and they're diverse, they will figure out a way around these chemical contaminants for us.
Okay. So I want a similar question in, discussing seed oil.
Yeah.
And the effects on the microbiome.
Yeah. So there's not a lot of studies on seed oil and the effects on the microbiome. So what the people who are very concerned about seed oils are talking about is the oxidation of the oils, right? So they'll say that they're oxidized. So and when oils oxidize, they develop these toxic compounds. They're called lipid peroxides. Lipid peroxides can have all kinds of dysfunctional effects on our cells, but there's not a lot of data on what the result is on the microbiome. But then there's also studies where they take saturated fat and they remove the saturated fat or replace the saturated fat in the diet with seed oils, and those people have all kinds of health improvements, right? So it's really hard to translate information at a cellular level to what actually happens in the human system. So right now, I have not seen any data that seed oils will have a drastic impact on the microbiome.
Okay. Same question, microplastics.
So microplastics, there is data that microplastics can have a negative effect on the microbiome. So, and there's a couple reasons for this. Number one is it's not just the physical plastic, but almost all of the microplastics are also covered with certain chemicals like phthalates, right? And it's those chemicals that actually have a negative impact on the microbes because they are inherently antimicrobial or bactericidal in their function. And so the microplastics become a carrier for those chemicals. And because the microplastics don't break down, they are a forever carrier. So they're really kind of carrying the forever chemicals that people talk about as well. So that actually, there is data on that having a very negative effect on the microbiome.
And what do we do about that?
So in microplastics, I think, it's funny because you go, okay, the studies that came out that go, drinking water out of plastic bottles, right, becomes a big source of microplastics. So you go, okay, I'm ditching plastic bottles and drinking glass bottles. Then there was a French study that just came out that said, actually, glass bottles have even more microplastics because of the cat, right? And you're like, what do you do?
And the cans are lined with it.
Totally.
And the carpet has it, you're kicking it up.
Everything, right? So my advice to people is to not really be obsessed with this stuff, right? because anything within your control that is measurable or controllable, do it, right? If you feel better about not using fragrances and all that because you know they could be endocrine disruptors, then stop using fragrances. So you get cleaner lotions, get cleaner deodorants, and so on. Do those kinds of things. But worrying about all your exposure to these things does nothing but harm your microbiome, because the stress alone creates more dysfunction in your microbiome than what we see microplastics can do so far. Right. And in fact, there was a study published in Frontiers of Immunology in 2015, and this was a prospective article that was written by two well-known researchers who looked at a bunch of studies, and they suggested that stress-induced gut dysfunction, leaky gut, was the number one cause of mortality worldwide, because they could show the clinical connection between stress causing leaky gut and how that leaky gut created chronic disease in the body. So I would say to people that you stressing about microplastics, stressing about glyphosate and all that will cause more harm than the actual glyphosate microplastics. Right. And it just becomes an obsession with people because it's impossible to get away from these things.
Yeah, I think the premise is educate and then help create a solution,
Yeah.
right? Um,
And the solution often, and this is kind of my health goal, because people often ask me, what are your health goals? My singular health goal is about building resilience, right? Because I don't want to be healthy by having to make perfect choices. I live 80/20. Sometimes it's 70/30, you know? Uh, there's a lot of fun living that happens in that 20% bad decisions, right? And I want to be able to do that and not suffer for it. And so resilience comes in part from functional redundancies in the body, right? So having a high diversity of microbes that can do lots of different functions in your body will allow your body to deal with stressors and deal with things that are imperfect at the time when you expose yourself to it. And then the rest of the time you're recovering and you're building that system, that resilient system in your body. So if you have a degree of resilience, you don't have to worry about those things as much.
Excellent. So are probiotics just expensive fairy dust? Are most supplements dead on arrival by the time they reach your gut?
Most probiotics are dead on arrival before they reach your gut. Yeah. So I'd say most probiotics are expensive fairy dust. Not all. There's definitely studies on some probiotics that are profoundly effective in your system, but they're few and far between. So people have to be really diligent about finding the ones that have research behind it.
How do we find
Yeah. So that's tough. I think there's one thing. So, okay, if a company has studies on their product, they will talk about those upfront on their sales pages and their websites and all that, right? So what you really need to look for are companies that have research on their actual formulation. Now, here is the little bit of wool that companies pull across people's eyes. They say they are research probiotic. What they're actually saying is that some of the strains that they've included in their formula have studies on their own, right? But again, I mentioned before, you combine strains, it can knock out a fact, right? So what you really need is a study on the finished formulation. So you want to look for companies that really talk about the studies that they have on their finished product. Now, and most consumers are probably not going to be able to figure that out, right? So what I tell consumers is look at what doctors are using, right? Look at what health professionals are using, right?
we are interested doctors though, so
Well, a lot of doctors we can't, right? So if you take like functional medicine doctors and you look at what the majority of them are using on their patients who are paying them for results, right? Then you can feel a degree of confidence. Now, what's good about today's modern age is a lot of those doctors are out there talking about what they did. So go online, follow a few doctors, a few MDs, NDs, DCs, and so on, and get a sense of what they're using in their practices, and that'll help.
very cool. Did we miss any other major like gut disruptors?
Um, Stress. I'm glad we touched on stress because I think that's one that is really doesn't really get the light of day the way it should, because it is quite arguably one of the biggest, most profound disruptors of our gut,
And everyone's stressed.
and everyone's stressed, right? And here's the crazy thing: when you're stressed, one of the reasons why it disrupts the gut so much is that stress induces inflammation. Inflammation will create disruption in the gut. And in fact, one of the things it does is it increases the growth of dysfunctional microbes who do better in a stressed environment for the host, right? And then those microbes have mechanisms of how to create more stress in you because they want to maintain that ecosystem. And so stress perpetuates gut dysfunction, and that dysfunctional gut perpetuates more stress, and the cycle keeps going. Right. So we really need to address the issue of stress, not only from mindfulness work and things like that may help people, but we really have to look at it from the gut's perspective as well and stop the cycle at the gut.
A fiber, fasting, fermented food. Genius biohack or overrated health trend?
All of them, I think, genius biohacks. Yep.
Talk to me a little bit about why fiber is important, fasting is important in fermented food.
Yeah. So fiber is probably the most well-studied macronutrient on the planet, right? So we've got studies on protein, on fats, and so on. Fiber is the most well-studied. So for example, a 2019 meta-analysis study, this is a study of all the studies on the topic that included up to almost 1 million subjects in the analysis. They saw that for every 10 grams of fiber you add to your daily diet, you can reduce your all-cause mortality risk, that means dying from anything, by 10%. Up to 45 grams and 45%, right? So you want to reduce your all-cause mortality by 45%, take 45 grams of fiber a day, right? And that it sounds so simple, and you're like, what the hell? Like, what is so special about fiber? The crazy thing is we can't even digest it. We don't get anything out of the fiber, right? So then why is it so powerful? It feeds the gut, right? All of the fiber goes to the gut, and the gut converts it to these magical compounds that have tremendous effect on the body. Short chain fatty acids and urolithins and peptides and all of these wonderful things. So fiber, critically important, right? Fasting is also really.
Let me pose it for you as that. Give me your top 3 favorite fibers.
So very simple. I like psyllium husk is pretty simple that most people will utilize. It's soluble and insoluble, a good mix. I like oat-based beta glucans because they not only do they feed the microbiome, but they also have a benefit to the immune system. And then I really like things like pectin, which is a fiber that comes from fruits. And then prebiotic fibers. So that's a separate category of fibers called oligosaccharides. These are some of the most profound types of fibers you can consume. So they're abbreviated xylo-oligosaccharide, XOS, fructo-oligosaccharide, FOS, or galacto-oligosaccharides, GOS. Those are very, very profound. If you get enough of those each day, you can reduce all-cause mortality in a very significant.
So are we taking these as like whole food products, or are we taking them as supplements?
So I do both because I try to diligently hit the target of 45 to 50 grams a day. I also know, like, traveling around and all that, it's hard to be super mindful of how much and what you're eating to know you're getting enough fiber to food. So I supplement with 20 to 25 grams a day, and I'll tell you how I do it. But then also I then count, generally I get about 20 grams from my diet. So even the worst Americans get about 8 or 9 grams, right? Even like the people that just eat fast food all day long, even they get about 8 or 9 grams. So because of the way I eat, and I try to eat mostly whole foods, I know I'm getting around 20 grams, and then I supplement another 20 grams. The best way to supplement it is to take that fiber right before a meal, right? Because it does a number of things. Number one, it makes you eat less, right? So it makes you feel more full. It activates your natural GLP-1s, which everyone likes to talk about now. It controls blood sugar better. And then it helps with motility as well. So your bowel movements are good. So I take 4 to 5 grams before each meal. Sometimes I go as high as 10 grams. Now, fasting, you asked about that. I think fasting can be really beneficial for the gut as well. There are studies that show that fasting can actually increase the diversity of the gut microbiome. Now, and that might be counterintuitive, like, okay, wait, we know feeding the gut is good. Why is not feeding the gut good? Right. So the way the fermentation structure works in the gut is there are primary digesters, secondary digesters, tertiary digesters, and so on. So when you eat food, when we eat the big macromolecules that we eat, the protein and the fats and fiber and so on, there are primary digesters that'll break down those foods, and then they'll create byproducts that actually feed the next set of bacteria, and then they'll create byproducts that feed the next. Now, the more you let that happen, the higher your diversity will be. If the primary digesters are done breaking down the food that you ate, and then before the secondary can start feeding on what the byproducts they made, you add in more food, then the primary take over again, right? So you don't get the full benefit of all of the food.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So having some degree of fasting throughout the day, you don't have to do 48-hour fast and all that. If someone feels good doing that, by all means do it every once in a while. But most of the benefit is achieved between a 12 to 14-hour period. You can do most of that overnight. So for me, I've been doing 14, 15 hours every day for years now because it's just become part of my routine.
Now you're not concerned because I've talked to a lot of experts that have an issue with fasting because it lowers your protein intake, and then there are other issues like all cause mortality with that. Are you concerned with that at all?
So there is diminishing return if you fast too long. That's one of the issues with it, is people that maybe do prolonged fasting too often, right? So if you're doing 48 hours, 72-hour prolonged fasting very often, then that can have diminishing return. The other concern that a lot of experts and clinicians have is for women fasting, depending on the time of the month and where they are in their cycle. So there could be some hormonal things to consider there as well. Now, generally, there's probably 60 or so clinical trials on women and fasting that say it's generally beneficial. But women's systems are complicated, so they should be talking to their doctor and all that about how to do it, when to do it, right? But if you were to ask a general question about the population, generally it's good.
It's good. Okay. And I mean, like you said, you're fasting at night while you sleep, and then maybe before dinner or for breakfast.
Exactly.
Where you
Yep.
go, right? Excellent. And then fermented foods.
So fermented foods are really, really good for you if they are truly fermented foods. There's a lot of nonsense out there.
Yeah, let's talk about like what is a truly fermented.
Yeah, so a true fermented food is one that is done in a traditional way with the right type of inoculum. And inoculum means the right yeast or the right bacteria that is known to ferment that food in the appropriate way, right? So take traditional kombucha versus what you find in the store, right? So traditional kombucha uses a very specific pattern of yeast fermentation, then bacterial fermentation, right? So there's a two-step process to it, and the fermentation is allowed to go long enough where you make enough organic acids and all that. And the thing is, at the end of the day, that beverage is going to taste pretty sour and have some bitter notes, and it's not really that palatable, right? The stuff in the store doesn't go through the entire fermentation process. Number one, because that'll take too long in manufacturing, and the longer it takes in manufacturing, the higher the cost of producing it. So they do a lot of shortcuts, and then any of the sour, bitter notes that you get, they mask it with sugars and flavoring and all of that. So you're really not getting the benefit out of it. I would recommend to people, because it's so hard to find commercially fermented products that really meet the standards of true fermented foods, I would encourage them to try to do fermentation themselves, right? There's a lot of tools and capabilities to do that. You can make your own yogurts, you can make your own, sourdough bread, all of these things. So absolutely use traditional fermentation techniques, because what you're experiencing, which is what you said in the beginning, you can drink milk and it's going to fuck you up, or you can drink fermented milk and you'll be fine. The reason is it's a pre-digested superfood once you ferment it.
That's great knowledge to know because, you're out there buying sauerkraut or like you said, kombucha is very popular now, or all these other, kimchi, and, you're just fucking wasting your money.
You are, and you feel like you're doing good. You're making a right decision. You're spending money on these things with good intent, but it's unfortunate that most of those commercial versions, because of the commercialization, they have to shortcut the important process of fermentation. But you can do all of those things at home.
So I want to switch gears again now and talk about, you know, I hear that the microbiome, like there could be addiction in there, whether it's drugs or alcohol. I've heard that even osteoporosis can start the microbiome. Um, you know, I I almost want to say it seems like bullshit that there's like, right? Like we finally found the spot for everything. Um, So can gut dysfunction really rewire your personality and your different traits in your body?
It can. So it can through a couple of different interconnected ways, right? So you have to think about like where does your personality traits come from? What is driving your like? Are you a really motivated person? Are you a very lazy person? Are you a frightful person? Are you pretty chill and calm and nothing really bothers you, right? Those are all dictated by neurotransmitters, right? So there are chemical messengers that alter how you respond to the world around you, right? And that can change over time. So it really comes down to those chemical responders. Where are most of those chemical responders made? A lot of them are made in the gut, right? So we'll take the simplest example of dopamine, right? About 50% of your dopamine is actually made in your gut. And dopamine is the compound that provides motivation, right? It provides attention, focus, motivation. We're trying to stoke dopamine by addictive behaviors, right? And the reason why they're addictive is because dopamine gives you a reward-like euphoric feeling, right? And when we do things like eat too much or drugs or sex or porn or anything, all of those things stoke dopamine in people, right? That's why they become addicted to
But even something that's not food related will
it.
still react in the gut.
Yes, because remember the gut and the brain are two parts of the same system,
Okay.
and they're interconnected, right?
So
Yeah, it's the same thing. So what dopamine is being made in the gut is also utilized in the brain. Serotonin that's made in the gut is utilized throughout the central nervous system, and then on top of that, the gut can also dictate how some of these compounds are made. So, for example, we know that serotonin and melatonin are really important, right? Serotonin is the happy hormone. Melatonin allows you to sleep, rest, and relax, right? The precursor to serotonin and melatonin is a compound called tryptophan. It's an amino acid, right? So you need tryptophan to make serotonin and melatonin, right?
yeah, we know the whole turkey thing, right?
Exactly. The turkey thing, which is what people always said, that makes you sleepy afterwards. So if you when you look at that, you go, okay, so that means to get more serotonin and melatonin, you just need more tryptophan, right? And so people supplement with it. They do, it's called 5-HT, right? They supplement tryptophan. Here's the problem. Studies have shown very clearly if your gut is dysfunctional and you have what we call leaky gut, and you have a high level of inflammation, chronic low-grade inflammation. In fact, those same inflammatory markers I mentioned with joint health, bone health, and so on, IL-6, TNF alpha, IL-1, what that does is it shifts tryptophan metabolism where it doesn't become melatonin and serotonin. It actually becomes quinolinic acid and kynurenine. Quinolinic acid and kynurenine are neurotoxic compounds. They actually create toxicity in the brain and central nervous system and induce anxiety, right? So this starting material that can become your happy hormone and sleep hormone, it can also become your neurotoxic and anxiety hormone as a result of shifts in your gut, right? So the gut plays such an important role in how your body deals with things. So this goes back to our original important part of the discussion around that catabolic anabolic beta, right? When you can have a cell called a chondrocyte whose job it is to build cartilage and repair the cartilage that we're damaging by walking around, exercising, doing all the things. But in the case of inflammation from the gut, especially, that shifts to a cartilage degradation cell that completely shifts how that cell functions, right? So that's how the gut can affect everything in the system.
I mean, it's amazing to me that, usually you say, okay, it either works or doesn't. But here it either works positively or works in negatively against you. And this is a perspective I've never heard before.
Yeah.
And so it makes it real. And also very consequential in a sense.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then it also allows you to understand that, hey, when I take actions that help my gut and change the ecosystem, right, and change the inflammatory milieu, you could see how it flips back. So that joint cell that I'm talking about, the chondrocytes that either build cartilage or eat cartilage, if you change the inflammatory milieu by changing the gut and what you put in your system, it goes from eating away at your joints to rebuilding your joints, right? And it can happen at any age. You could be 80 years old and have like virtually no cartilage anymore, and you could start rebuilding cartilage at that point.
so, you mentioned leaky gut and I make the assumption everybody has a leaky gut. Yeah, you're right because, we're living in this world or whatever. But how do people really know, oh, what are like the byproducts or or the telltale signs so that somebody watching this can say to themselves, "Hey, I have leaky gut. Hyperactivity."
Yeah, so I would say if you have any primary digestive issues, you almost certainly have leaky gut, right? So if you get a lot of bloating, indigestion, reflux when you eat food, if you get a lot of loose stool or constipation, you more than likely have leaky gut. If you have IBS like symptoms, right? So a lot of cramping and all that, you more than likely have leaky gut. Now on top of that, let's say you don't have any of those, but you have immune issues. So you have allergies, you have food sensitivities or asthma, or you get issues on your skin like eczema, psoriasis. Those are all tied to leaky gut as well. Let's say you experience anxiety or depression, you have leaky gut, right? There was a 19-year long study in the Netherlands looking at what are the biggest drivers of anxiety in the population. They were looking at biomarkers and molecular drivers within the body. They found gut-induced endotoxins. So these are toxins that leak across a dysfunctional gut barrier. Those are the primary predictors of whether or not an individual will develop anxiety. And as long as they had elevated levels of those endotoxins, even if after that 19 years follow-up, they always had anxiety and depression. If they did something to fix their gut and those endotoxins went down, their anxiety and depression went down, right? So all of these things that don't seem connected are truly interconnected. And I would say that the vast majority of people walking around have some degree of leaky gut.
So my crazy ex-girlfriend has a leaky gut.
Oh my God, she's probably super leaky. And you could have gotten a leaky gut from her,
Really?
right? You didn't know it could be contagious, right? This is the crazy part about it.
Wow. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so we live in an ecosystem wherever we live, right? With the people we live with, assuming you live with her at some point, people we work with frequently and all that, there is a home bio. There is an office bio, and everyone who participates in that biome are shedding microbes into that environment, and you're picking other people's microbes up. So there was a study that was done, I think, by Johns Hopkins, where they took individuals that had to go through a course of antibiotics, and they sampled their microbiome before they started the antibiotic, and then throughout the course of the antibiotics, and then for 6 months after they stopped the antibiotic. But then they also sampled the microbiomes of people that live with those individuals, even non-intimate partners, platonic siblings, and all that. And what they found was all the household inhabitants of that individual also saw similar perturbations in their microbiome, even though they weren't taking the antibiotic, right? So we shed just trillions of microbes every week and month into the environment that we're in. So if you've got a partner that is very dysfunctional and not caring about their health and doing unhealthy things and clearly has, emotional issues and all that, they're absolutely shedding microbes that can alter your microbiome and then pull you into that same space.
Can it work the other way? Where
You could influence them. Yep. The question would be, you know, who has a biome that's more powerful in terms of its ability to create change?
I feel like the leaky gut overpowered.
Yates. For sure. Well, in part because people who tend to have that inclination towards unhealthy behaviors and all that, they do those unhealthy behaviors way more consistently than people do good behaviors, right? If you're addicted to stuff, if you're drinking too much, smoking, you're going to do that very consistently versus how consistently we work out or eat healthy and so on.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, a lot of eye openers here today. What's the ugliest or craziest thing you've seen under a microscope in like a patient sample?
There are viruses that I'm seeing, and that one you can't see through a microscope. You have to have an electron microscope, right? So I remember one at the university we were looking at samples from a patient that was riddled with all kinds of it was a multiple infection, and you're trying to figure out what is the primary infection and what are secondary infections, right? So this individual started with E. coli, which is a very pathogenic form of E. coli. It's called E. coli 015787. And a lot of my research was around E. coli infection. And so we were looking at gut samples. We were looking at lining of the gut samples and mucosal samples. And what we saw riddled along with the E. coli samples were these viruses that just look so sinister, right? Because they look like little invading spaceships. right, with this hood structure and these prongs that just prong onto the cell and inject their RNA or DNA, depending on the virus, into the cell, and their genetic material takes over the cell and causes the cell to make more versions of themselves. So they're just so sinister in how they function. That was one of the most interesting things to see a cell that had bacteria all around it, and then this one virus sitting on it and just destroying it. Even though the bacteria is around it, bacteria couldn't compare to what this virus is doing.
Now, in regards to that, you're saying you've got the bacteria, which is in the microbiome, you've got this virus, and the virus is attacking your cell, the
Yeah.
guy's cell.
Yeah. Now there are viruses that attack bacteria too. They're called bacteriophages, right? So, but in this case, it was a virus that saw the opportunity, and when the immune system is distracted because of all this bacteria around, I'm going to go after the human cell now.
That's incredible. Let's talk about longevity now.
Yeah.
So if you only had 3 microbiome hacks to like make it to 120, what would they be?
I would manage stress for one. I would diversify my diet as much as I can, including fiber, and I would take a probiotic that helps with leaky gut.
Wow, so nothing like crazy new age outer space stuff.
Nope. No need. Like I wouldn't. I mean, saunas and all this kind of stuff, technology and all are great. They're little add-ons,
Yeah.
but those won't be the foundational things that I think will have the biggest impact.
Is gut optimization more important than exercise, sleep, or like even not smoking or doing, eating McDonald's or whatever?
Yeah, so that's hard to answer because you can actually see the benefit of exercise, sleep, healthy diet is optimization of the gut, right? One of the main ways in which these lifestyle things provide health benefits is because they have a significant impact on the gut. And like exercise, for example, is fantastic for the gut in terms of diversifying the gut, reducing stress, reducing pathogen load, reducing leaky gut, and so on. Right. So I would say all of those things work in part because they have such a profound effect on the gut. Yeah, and as I mentioned, if you look at the pillars, you have to have all those things as part of your gut healing protocol.
So if I wasn't scared before this interview, I'm definitely concerned now. But let's say someone listening today is just, not convinced or whatever. They don't care about their gut health. Like what kind of future, what disease, what's waiting for them?
So number one, let's take autoimmune disease, for example, right? 40, 50 years ago, we had about 25 or 30 known autoimmune diseases that we had to deal with. Now we have over 110. And these are diseases where your own immune system is attacking your body, right? It could be attacking your heart, your thyroid, your brain cells, your eyes. I mean, there's autoimmune conditions where you're losing your eyesight because your own immune system is attacking your eyes from the inside out, right? Of course, inflammatory bowel conditions, Crohn's, colitis, and all that are your immune cells attacking your own gut. And so that's one example of like, as we become more dysfunctional and we don't care about our ecosystem and we're not taking care of our gut and our microbiome, we're creating conditions where we can create new diseases we have to deal with. And so I would say if you don't at all pay attention to your gut, the things you are absolutely exposing yourself to are a myriad of autoimmune conditions, metabolic dysfunction, so insulin resistance, heart disease, and so on. Obesity is very much tied to gut health, and then neurodegeneration. So Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, to me, arguably are some of the most scariest conditions, right? Losing your mind and not knowing who you are. And I have friends who have parents that have gone through it not too long ago, and it's really, really scary to see. Both of those conditions have ties to the gut, very specifically, right? So those are the things that are in people's futures if they're not paying attention.
Excellent. Is there anything else you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah. So one of the awesome things about the time in which we live in right now is we finally are starting to understand how the human system works, right? So if you think about the majority of functions in our system are coming from the gut, from the microbes, from the genetics that they have. All of these years, centuries of medical research and all that have only been looking at a portion of the human system. We're finally unraveling the rest of how
How far along are we, honestly?
so we are still at the tip of the iceberg for sure. But that tip is really profound, right? Which means it's so exciting to think about what else we're going to discover. And there's going to be a microbiome based solution for some of the scariest conditions we deal with. There's going to be a microbiome-based solution for Alzheimer's. There's going to be a microbiome-based solution for numerous cancers. There's going to be a microbiome-based solution for things like skin disorders, like acne, eczema, and so on, right? That people deal with. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is that because many of these conditions are driven by ecological dysfunctions, people have way more control than they think to affect their own outcomes, right? We don't have to just lean on our doctors and lean on drugs and drug companies and so on. All of the choices that we make every single day, what we put into our system, who we hang out with, what we wear, how much we exercise, all of those things have a profound effect on your gut, and your gut has a profound effect on your health, right? So we have a lot more control than we thought we did, and we have a lot more tools right now to effectuate our health in a positive way.
Do you think that the gut is the biggest needle mover? Saying that we're only like 5 or 10% in, right? Is that our biggest bang for our buck when we figure the rest out? Do you think it's probably not gonna be as profound?
Yeah, I mean, understanding, the complexities of the gut microbiome and how it affects disease outcome and disease pathology, I think, is probably the biggest area for us. But that also speaks to the skin microbiome. For example, I've been doing a lot of work on the skin microbiome and how that affects skin disorders and chronic disorders. So there's a study called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. It's the longest aging study ever, right? It's a 65-year study right now, and it has almost 4,000 subjects in it. That's been going on since people were 19 years old.
I was even saying those people are basically still alive, same people. They don't add to it or
They
whatever.
don't add to it. This is the only what they call longitudinal study, meaning they're taking an individual and following them from when they were young all the way till they die, right? And they're looking at all their choices, behaviors, changes in their system, and all that to understand the age process, the aging process. One of the things that they found was that one of the best predictors of someone developing age-related disorders and chronic disease was the health of their skin and the appearance, actually, of their skin. So people who had wrinkly skin, dry skin, thin skin, and had age-related marks on their skin had far higher risk and prevalence of developing chronic diseases. And we're not talking about skin diseases. We're talking about conditions like bone health and Alzheimer's and so on, right? So, and that is a factor of the microbiome of the skin.
So, when you look at a study like that, can you say that their skin looks good because they're doing everything else right? Or is it because, they take care of their skin?
Yeah. So your knee-jerk reaction when you see a study like that is you go, okay, so the people with the healthier looking skin had lower risk of chronic disease, right? So what the thinking would be is that the skin is a reflection of the inside, right? So their insides are healthier and thereby their skin looks better. And so it's reflecting what's happening on the inside. But that's not actually what the study found. The study found that skin aging is a precursor that occurs first before aging or dysfunction on the inside. So the skin was a leading predictor of dysfunction. Right now, why would that be? So there is, of course, inside parts of that, meaning your digestion is slowly disrupting, so you're not getting in as much nutrients. Skin is built from the inside out, so you have to feed the skin from the inside out. That may be part of it. The other part of it was the skin itself was becoming leaky. There's this concept of leaky skin now, where the barrier system of the skin is becoming leaky, so things are penetrating through the skin, causing inflammation. And the microbes on the skin are very important for preserving the barrier function of the skin. And then the microbes of the skin talk to the microbes in the gut. You've got the gut-skin axis. So people who had the best outcomes had healthy guts and healthy skin at the same time.
I mean, that's incredible because, um, you know, you keep talking about the microbiomes, like they're everywhere.
Mhm.
'Cause I spoke to a holistic dentist, and his whole thing is like this microbiome has to be in order before this one could be in order,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, is it just another secondary of this because you're eating good food and whatever,
Right.
right? Because I've often looked at myself like I'm almost 50.
Yeah.
A lot of people tell me, "Oh, your skin looks good."
Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
But I come like my grandfather had psoriasis. I still have a little bit of it. I have ulcerative colitis, right? That I've recently, I think, cured with Just Thrive, taking that.
Nice.
And So but my skin's been good even though my insides have been rotted.
Yeah.
Right, right. So, what's going on there? Is it genetics? Is it the way I eat, right? Is it pure luck?
Yeah. I think a lot of it is the microbes on your skin because we know, like, when you look at skin conditions, people whose skin is less resilient, this goes back to the resilience question, right? Um, so if you have an overgrowth of, say, Staph aureus on your skin, this is a type of bacteria that can penetrate a little bit deeper in your skin, produce toxins, and induce immune responses, right? So then that part of the skin is constantly getting attacked by the immune system that's trying to respond to that bacteria. Now, that compounds if your gut is unhealthy because your gut causes your immune system to overreact to everything in the most inflammatory manner. So now you've got a trigger on your skin. Your gut is causing your immune system to be even more hyperactive. And so the trigger can actually create more damage than it normally would. Now your skin is healthy and looks good and looks resilient. So you probably have a lot more staph epidermidis rather than staph aureus. That staph, instead of causing immune reactions, actually dampens immune reactions. It can actually cause turnover of dead skin cells. It can actually reduce the formation of wrinkles by upregulating collagen and elastin production, right? So the microbes they're doing work on your skin to maintain healthy skin.
That's interesting. Because the other piece of this whole puzzle that I find interesting is when you do talk about, a lot of these skin conditions are autoimmune
Yeah.
based, right? And now you talk about this microbiome of your skin. And we talk about washing our hands, and we talk about these cleaners, or people do Botox and fillers and things like that. Um, are they negatively impacting your skin doing these?
Yeah, so the things that we know that negatively impact your skin microbiome, thereby negatively impacting your skin, are any sort of personal care products that have pigments in them or chemical preservatives or phthalates, parabens, and all that. And the problem is most of the cosmetic products have all those, right? So they can be quite damaging to the skin. Over sterilization, so over cleaning the skin can have that effect. So if you're using like peroxides and all that, and you people have this mentality of sterilizing their skin,
Yeah.
that's actually a negative for the skin as well. Using body soaps that have antimicrobials in it, right? But because there was this massive proliferation of antibacterial body wash.
They should make those illegal.
They should. I mean, it's just there's no point to them, right? Besides creating problems on the skin. And then even things like, for example, if you use a lot of dryer sheets and when you wash laundry or you have, really, poor laundry detergent, that remains on your clothes and that contact on your skin can have a negative effect as well. So most of what we do on a day-to-day basis is not good for our skin at all.
Yeah.
You know,